I think American foreign policy has to be far less interventionist. There's a huge percentage population, and I think it's the majority, and I think it's always the majority, who are going to have their worldview fed into them by the people on the screens. Massive conflict can escalate and can lead to World War III.
So recently, Michael Malice was on the Citizen podcast talking about the insanity that is U.S. foreign policy, some of its worst effects around the world and domestically, and what can be done to impede the madness. Now, Malice is one of the most prominent anarchists in the world, and he always does a good job of injecting humor and satire to most questions, including this one. So let's get his take on it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I think American foreign policy has to be far less interventionist. The fact that we have bases in like Germany and South Korea and Middle East is just really, if you care that much about veterans, as I know you and I both do, why are you sending them in harm's way unless it's absolutely necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say the United States has made a lot of mistakes.
Sure.
And we have to address those. And I'm not, from my perspective, like we've upset the balance in the Middle East quite a bit. Sure. Not that those people were doing the right thing anyways, but if we had left Iran alone back in the 50s, our problems there would be way less, in my opinion. Maybe more, but I think probably less.
Iran is a big one because in 1979 you had the Shah, who was kind of an authoritarian figure, but like people don't realize this. Andy Warhol would go there all the time, and in his diaries complain like there'd be less caviar. So this is how Western Iran was. Yeah. And then you
can look at the pictures. There's women on the beach in bikinis in 79.
And people have this leftist mindset, like if something's bad, therefore it's the worst thing ever. So it's like, oh, he's so bad, he's so bad, so bad. It's like, careful what you wish for. Yeah. So there could always be someone much, much worse.
Same thing with Saddam Hussein.
Oh, sure.
Shouldn't fuck with that. I mean, same thing with Bashar al-Assad, in my opinion.
Sure.
Shouldn't have fucked with that either.
Yeah, I mean, Iran's a tipping point, but it began far earlier than 1979. They are right to talk about, to some extent, that Iranian values and Iranian culture was generally more pro-Western at that time, but that also caused a massive backlash with the fundamentalists. And you know why that happened? Because the U.S. instituted a coup of that government in 1953 along with the British called Operation Ajax. And during that time that there was a more open, more pro-Western culture in Iran, the new leader, which overthrew Mossadegh, his name was Shah Pahlavi, he instituted a secret police and a censorship regime and banned a lot of political opposition. That drew the ire of the fundamentalists and actually allowed the Ayatollahs to take over in the revolution of 78 and 79. So Iran is one of the first tipping points. Now, I think he's also right about Iraq. That was a horrendous mistake to overthrow Iraq, have a 20-plus year occupation there, killed about 1 million Iraqis, a few thousand Americans, put us behind and in debt in many billions. And, you know, there's still ramifications that we're paying from that now. Same with Syria. We just are seeing right now that Christians are being slaughtered and Druze are being slaughtered by the dozens by this regime that was deposed, the Assad regime, and replaced by a former Al-Qaeda fighter in Iraq that fought U.S. soldiers, but the U.S. ended up supporting him and ISIS indirectly through weapon transfers under Operation Timber Sycamore. So that's where we're at.
Now we've got a literal ISIS guy, which Israel's bombing them today, I guess.
Are they bombing them today?
Damascus, yeah, they hit the presidential palace today.
Oh, Jesus
so we'll see how that goes. But I'm not keen on paying for the mistakes of my ancestors. Sure. As a matter of fact, I'll kill everybody that comes at me. I don't give a fuck who it is.
Right.
And I think that's the attitude we should have. And then, you know,
I like the idea that people are scared to fuck with Americans.
Yeah, that's
a really
good thing.
big one.
Yeah. So here's the landscape as it is today. China is our #1 foreign adversary, if you want to call them that. I mean, they are. They're trying to steal our shit. They're not a military threat to us in any meaningful way, but they steal a lot of our shit. They've tried to head off resources. They own about 65% of global rare earth mineral rights, shit like that. So certainly they're fucking around, but it's not like it's not a real existential threat unless we allow it to become one.
Sure.
But their proxies right now are Iran and its proxy Iraq, and its other proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthi.
Right.
And then Pakistan, Myanmar, all the Central Asian stands, and to some degree partnered with Russia, although I think that relationship is not great.
I think that relationship is much better than a lot of people think, especially since the invasion by Putin of Ukraine, which wasn't really the start of that conflict. That conflict began in 2014 when the U.S. overthrew the Yanukovych government. That pushed when the U.S. started to send more and more aid to Ukraine and expanded NATO to the east, contrary to James Baker's assertions to Gorbachev. That's when it drove Russia closer into the arms of Russia. Now, a few things from before. I'm with the host when he talks about, a defensive posture. I'm not a pacifist. I'm all for the United States responding in kind if the U.S. is attacked or invaded, but that's not the situation that's unfolding. Actually, it's utopian to consider war that way if you're an American. All America fights in my entire lifetime, essentially, is offensive wars, regime change operations, military strikes, all sorts of endeavors engaged in empire building overseas where, the supposed belligerents haven't attacked the U.S. at all. Now, 9/11, that's true. But even in that case, that was the excuse for the U.S. to overthrow the Taliban in Afghanistan, which did, offer to hand bin Laden over as long as it was to a third party. The U.S. said, no cigar, we're still going to bomb you and have a 20-plus year occupation. And that's an occupation that did last 20 years. It took hundreds of thousands of lives, hundreds of billions of dollars to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. Now, China is not our military adversary whatsoever. To be clear, he does clarify that to say they're not really a military threat, but they steal our stuff. Well, if you're talking about IP, that's controversial to begin with. And if you're talking about military threat, they have no potential to project military might that could touch the United States in most ways. Now, they do have nukes. And guess what? The U.S. is engaged in a military buildup around the Pacific more so than it ever has been before. So, when it comes down to it, if you're saying they're a military threat, it comes down to, well, they put their country way too close, our military assets and our bases overseas.
The question is, what should the United States do about that? Should we develop and maintain proxies of our own? I don't think that's a good idea personally, right? But should we develop or maintain proxies of our own? If nothing, are you comfortable in a world where China has all this going on? And where is the red line for you? If they develop these same kind of deals they have with Iran, with Mexico or Canada, does it become a problem then? Or at what point does it become a problem? I've always thought that regional hegemony is probably the best idea.
Sure.
Right? Like the Monroe Doctrine mostly.
Sure.
But I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I think it's very, very complex. I also think that we are living in Plato's cave when it comes to international stuff, that we only see a very small part of it. We don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know how much of this fight is for show. We don't know how much China hates us in China, or China just testing their limits and being like, all right, what can we get away with? We don't really care. I think America's greatest asset is American culture, and the fact that we're conquering the world not through force of arms, because people consume our products. And it's very, very hard to hate a country if you listen to their music and watch their shows and read their books. So I think that is the best way to have kind of colonialism, for lack of a better term.
It's social colonialism.
It's social colonialism, right.
It's what I refer to as American soft power, right?
But it's the best.
It's by far the best.
It works. You see it in South Korea. You see it in Europe. You see it in many other places. And that's something I'm a big fan. I'm not a big fan of Hollywood per se, especially in recent years. But in terms of it being an engine of American exceptionalism and world domination, I'm a fan of it in that regard.
Yeah, this is a great argument, and it's one that few people make. The amount of influence that American culture can have without coercion, without military force, regime change operations, etc., which ultimately almost always go haywire. Just a few examples. The U.S. overthrew the elected government in Ukraine in 2014. It was called the Maidan coup, replaced it with a belligerent government toward Russia, and that's what caused a lot of civil conflict there. Now we're dumping in hundreds of billions of dollars, and the country sitting on the biggest stockpile of nukes is our enemy. We're fighting a new Cold War with a nuclear power, and our government's pretty belligerent with the Chinese too. Notwithstanding that, there was also supporting Iraq in the Iraq-Iran war at first. That killed hundreds of thousands of people. Saddam was still our enemy after that anyways. and funding the Mujahideen through the ISI, funneling arms to those forces, some of which, became Al-Qaeda. Some of them became the Northern Alliance that fought Al-Qaeda. But this was disastrous too. We always pay for long-term ramifications of these conflicts, whereas exporting our culture is done at the pleasure of the consumers of that culture. So that's something that should be a pro and something that opponents of the war machine should always promote. So I'm with Malice here totally. I think this is a great point that very few people bring up, including dissidents and opponents of war.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think red lines are very contextual. It's really easy to say, Chamberlain gets a really bad rap because after World War I happens and like half of Europe, the entire youth population is murdered for no reason, all the men, you can't blame him for being like, you know what, I'm just going to cut a deal because we're not doing this shit again.
Yeah.
We're exhausted. So it's for us to go to any kind of war with China. I mean, it's got to take a lot, I think.
There's not going to be any war with. They don't want this.
I don't think they want the heat either.
They definitely don't. They can't. We would decimate that country in a matter of weeks.
Do you think so?
Yes.
But they have nukes.
They don't have the kind of power required to hit us.
Okay. China can't hit us?
I mean, theoretically they could, but it would end their country forever.
Okay.
They would be gone.
Yeah, but that's not conquering the country forever. That's an insane war of attrition. That's a nuclear war. So, no, I don't think their country would be gone in a matter of days. But he's right when he clarified a little bit that nuclear war would, imperil their country as well. And it's true, they can't project as much military might, especially to hit the United States, but they could. They have carriers, and I think they have nuclear subs and some other resources that they could attach H-bombs to and do significant damage to some of our major cities. Obviously, it's not something that we want, even though, a lot of the neocons clamor for it, and, a lot of the right is as absurd toward China as a lot of the left is absurd toward Russia. And I'm talking about the mainstream left and right, by the way, not dissident leftists and dissident rightists that know better, but that is true.
Dave Smith, back when he was arguing against striking Iran, kept saying that Iran had escalatory dominance in the region. That is retarded.
What does that mean, escalatory?
Escalatory dominance means that they can escalate to a level that we won't escalate to in that region.
No, I don't think he's right about this. What Dave Smith was saying about that conflict, and I watch his show all the time, is that back when there was on the table during the Bush administration the idea of possibly striking Iran, the Pentagon said no because we don't have escalatory dominance against Iran. I think that is what Dave's talked about, not what he's saying.
Which is to say, I believe his point was to say that they would hit our bases. Same thing Tucker said, that 70,000 troops would get killed on our bases over there, which is nonsense, right?
Okay.
But
why is it nonsense?
Because they, while are rightly called a death cult, right? The leaders of the cult are never the ones that die.
Right, that's
you
right.
understand? Like that. So the leaders of the cult are like, they're not going to fucking do that stuff and get smoked. This is not going to happen.
Right.
They live to fight another day. That's the whole thing. It's the 1,000-year war.
Well, that's true, but they had the capacity to do that and voluntarily didn't. They voluntarily tipped off the Trump administration to know that they weren't going to do damage to U.S. forces, in contradiction to every neocon and every Netanyahuan argument about this, by the way. But they had the capacity. They could strike any number of bases in the Arabian Peninsula. There's like 45,000 servicemen plus contractors in that region, plus a large portion of the U.S. naval forces in and around Bahrain. They could have done it. They had the ability to do it, but they didn't do it because they didn't want to. They made a show of this to try to avert war, and it worked. And it's only because of Iranian restraint that we didn't get deeper involved. And that's the truth. And Dave did talk about that to some extent, but I think he was talking about escalatory dominance in regard to the supposed, 2007 or 2008 potential plan to strike Iran.
Live to fight another day, right? So this is just basic logic. Anybody that understands the history, even of the Ottoman Empire, before these guys, just the ideology that carries with this stuff, knew that was going to be stupid. Well, China thinks the same way. They think in terms, they have dictators for 30, 40 years. They don't have presidents for 4 years.
Sure.
They think in long term. So for them, attempting and failing, attempting and accomplishing a little bit, attempting and failing is perfectly acceptable.
That's right, yeah.
Whereas for us, it's not.
Right.
If you're the president of the United States and you ran on X, not on Twitter, but on X policy,
Right.
and you don't accomplish it, then you're a failure.
Right, sure.
But that's stupid because things take longer than 4 years almost always, right? So, another problem with the U.S. government, but American soft power is something that never ceases. It's not an operation. It is a tone. It's an ideology, right, that carries into the future.
You know what? It could be a bit. I mean, we don't know how much CIA. I'm not even kidding. CIA involvement is with that stuff.
Yeah. Mockingbird.
Sure,
You're familiar with. I mean, that never stopped.
Sure, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's CIA involvement in creating programs for export.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
100%.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's
Okay.
Yeah, agreed. We don't often know until documents are declassified, and even then, not everything that the CIA's done is declassified. We know that CIA had a role in overthrowing the governments of, I don't know, Iran, Guatemala. They tried in Cuba, the disastrous Bay of Pigs disaster. They tried to assassinate Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. They overthrew the government in Chile. They overthrew the government in Ukraine. On and on and on, and all we know about this is from what's already been released. What isn't released? So yeah, he's right. And the reference to Operation Mockingbird, if you don't know, it's the CIA's program that was used to control the mainstream news media, and this has been declassified and acknowledged by declassified documents, so we know that that was true too. This isn't a conspiracy theory. There's information about it. You can check it online.
No, because you rolled your eyes.
No. I mean, I thought everybody just assumed that was the case.
Oh, you rolled your eyes for that.
No, yeah. It's
okay.
like, yeah, that's they're definitely doing that.
And I don't think that that's necessarily wrong for them to do that.
No, as a matter of fact, if we're going to give money to USAID, that should be what it's spent on, right? Like,
No, that's not what it should be spent on, is clandestine military operations and psychological operations against enemy powers. This is somewhere I'll have to disagree, and if Malice agrees with that, I'll have to disagree with him on that too. That's only been disastrous for the U.S. It's netted us far more enemies than we should have if we kept to ourselves. I'm more with the host earlier when he said, if you have hegemony, make it regional hegemony, like the Monroe Doctrine that essentially kept us out of most wars that were going on in the world for about a century. There were a few, like the Mexican-American War and the Spanish-American War, but most of those were at least short-lived, and it didn't embroil us in the bloodiest catastrophes in Europe that transpired during that time. And there were many of them, by the way, in the Napoleonic era, the Crimean War, many other circumstances after that point. That would be a better foreign policy. And hey, I'm with, the architect of the Monroe Doctrine, John Quincy Adams, the president. He actually was Secretary of State when he kind of created that doctrine. When he boasted about the merits of America and the American government at that time, he said, "America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy." And that's the attitude I still wish our government had today. Of course, it doesn't. It's the exact opposite.
like warning everybody else, basically. Not just so warning the shitheads and encouraging the good people. That's
right. Just that should be our policy with Iran.
Yeah.
There's a huge underground there, from my understanding.
I agree. So here's something that might make you angry. In 2008 to 10, our Department of Energy, some of my friends were working there at the time at the policy level and at the security level, like NEST teams, people that are experts in energy security specifically, right? They came up with this plan to give Iran all the 3 to 5% uranium they wanted. We operate this. You guys don't get to have centrifuges. We'll do all this for you. We're going to give you this uranium. We're going to help you build your reactors. You're going to have energy for everybody. No brownouts or blackouts ever again, right? And in exchange, no centrifuges, no enrichment, and you're going to give us a deep discount on your oil, just like they do to China right now. And instead, Obama signed this fucking JICPOA deal with them and gave them $150 billion, which they almost immediately gave to Hamas and Hezbollah.
Okay, there's some mistakes on this. He's talking about the JCPOA that was created in 2015. First of all, I don't think the $150 billion is right, and it wasn't taxpayer money. What money did exchange hands as part of that deal was the U.S. agreed to unfreeze some bank accounts that were frozen of Iranian assets, and it wasn't all people, involved in every aspect of the conflict, between the United States and Israel that has grown over time, but it was actually people even involved in, the Iranian Revolution. You had the hostage crisis. The U.S. was, pissed off about that, rightly so, I think. Thankfully, those hostages were saved as Reagan waltzed in. But a lot of the bank accounts of Iranians were frozen due to that by retribution of the U.S. government. So the U.S. government decided to unfreeze those bank accounts. It wasn't just giving them money. And I think this is only proven to be like 40 to 50 billion and not 150 billion. Just trying to fact check here.
But we could have solved this problem 15 years ago. This would not have been a problem anymore. Iran would probably be an ally. So think about the trajectory of Saudi Arabia, whose royal family helped conduct 9/11, to our relationship with them now, where they just invested $600 billion in our economy.
Right. And they're on the verge of having diplomatic relations with Israel.
Yeah. I mean, they essentially do now. They're both signatories to the Abraham Accords.
Well, hey, I'm with them there. The Saudi complicity in 9/11 is crazy. Most Americans don't know anything about it, but the last few pages that they finally declassified years later, the 9/11 report, point to this. And it turns out that a Saudi intelligence asset, who may have been a CIA asset too, his name was Omar al-Bayoumi, paid for the residences and the livelihoods of two of the 9/11 hijackers, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midhar, after supposedly just meeting them and, hey, they're wayward Muslims that are having trouble kind of melting into society in America. I'm going to buy their, I'm going to pay their rent and pay for things for their sustenance, etc. And, the FBI admitted years later, they think that this guy might have had 50% potential of knowing about the 9/11 attacks ahead of time. And this was a Saudi intelligence asset. Americans have not really paid attention to this. It's been swept under the rug. So I'm glad he's pointing that out. The Saudi relationship has been bad for America too, by the way. It's led us to blockade Yemen because we did that. Our government did that to placate the Saudis, because the Saudis were particularly pissed off that the U.S. invaded Iraq. They saw correctly that would mean more Iranian and Shiite influence because of the power vacuum it created. That proved to be true.
So it's like, we can do this stuff, and that didn't require a war.
That's right. That's
one of the... I still don't understand how... I guess he's being nominated now, but if any president in my lifetime has actually deserved a nomination for or winning the Nobel Peace Prize, it's got to be Trump.
I thought you were going to say W.
Yeah.
It's got to be Trump.
I mean, Obama got it for being black, which I understand.
No, but the Abraham Accords is just one example.
Just the one, yeah.
Right.
But we can do this. We can. There's a path with Iran, and I think this is the deal they're trying to get done now, from my understanding with the people I know in the Trump admin. They're trying to go back to like, hey, remember that?
I think
we can do that.
I think there's a big idea in social media, and I could be wrong. People want everything to be a disaster, and massive conflict can escalate and can lead to World War III.
Yeah, hey, I'm mostly with Malice and what he said in this podcast in general, and the host at times, but I will say that Trump is not deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize if there ever was a president that was deserving of that, by the way. I think maybe James Buchanan would be much more deserving of a Nobel Peace Prize. John Tyler kept us out of war. Martin Van Buren, some presidents that actually kept the United States out of wars when there were some tensions going on at the time. Certainly not Trump. Let's look at his first administration. All right, so he escalated wars in both Yemen and Syria. By the way, he put boots on the ground in Syria. This was a disaster because it started the downturn for the Assad regime that ultimately culminated in overthrow, though that began under Obama and Operation Timber Sycamore, when U.S. aid poured $15 billion into the overthrow of Assad. Now, that wouldn't happen till the very end months of 2024. Under the Biden administration, you finally saw Jelani, the former al-Qaeda fighter, former member of ISIS, and founder of the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, al-Nusra. He took over. He's now the leader. That was a disaster. There's still U.S. forces in Syria ostensibly to fight against ISIS and protect the Kurds. It's just so absurd. They don't belong there. He also ramped up bombing in Afghanistan in 2018 and 2019. He deserves some credit there because he did start to plan for a withdrawal there. Some of his generals misled him about resource levels, etc. there, like, and Pompeo did as well. So he deserves some credit there, but ultimately he did ramp up bombing at a time. With Yemen, he's especially horrendous, if you ask me, because he used one of his sole presidential vetoes to extend the war in Yemen, extend the blockade, and U.S. participation in that blockade on behalf of Saudi Arabia. That's cost about 500,000 poor, starving Yemenis that die to conventional illnesses because they can't get access to vaccines and other things that are basic, health items that would keep them living. So that's where we're at right now, and Trump doesn't deserve that. And by the way, in his second term, he's arming Ukraine, bombing Yemen for a month. He's also started a new war with Iran, with Israel, shelving U.S. foreign policy concerns and ostensible negotiations with Iran in hopes of normalizing relations with them, which that's done. Put a fork in that one. And that conflict probably isn't ended yet, by the way. Netanyahu's still going to say they're weeks away from nukes, and it looks like they got some of the uranium out of Fordo. They have unlimited incentive to build a nuke now. So all these things, the point I'm getting at here is that Trump isn't deserving of a Nobel Peace Prize. Is he relatively less interventionist than other presidents? Well, it's like, yeah, I think compared to George W. Bush, but I mean, I don't know, man. Obama and him are close in my mind because Obama launched new wars in Syria and Libya. Those were catastrophic, and ramped up the drone war in the Arabian Peninsula. He's bad too. Both are undeserving of a Nobel Peace Prize if you're asking me. But hey, that's what I think. I want to hear from you, though. What do you think about U.S. foreign policy? Is Malice right in this podcast? Is the host right? Do you think Trump's deserving of a Nobel Peace Prize? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to The Citizen. Interesting podcast with interesting ideas, whether or not you agree with them. I appreciate that. I appreciate his candor and openness. And please consider becoming a YouTube member of mine. If you click the join button below, you can support the channel and get access in return to all my videos before they go out on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.